Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you how to easily mix pro level vocals from start to finish. Now this is a finished vocal mix. This is a finished, finalized mix. I'm going to show you what the finished vocal sounds like inside this mix. Then we'll strip off all the plugins and processing, and I will show you what the raw recorded vocal sounds like inside this mix. And after that, after you have your before and after, we will go through piece by piece, and we'll break down each move inside of each plugin to show you how we built out this vocal mix step by step. Starting off here is the finished vocal inside the final mix. Okay, now I'm going to strip off all the plugins here, and we'll take off the reverb too, and you can hear the raw recorded vocal as it sits against the final mix here. Couple things to note there. After we took off all the plugins, all the processing there, it is a higher vocal. It's sitting in a higher range, so there were a lot of frequencies that were poking out a little bit up top, and there was a little bit of harshness, a little bit of edginess to his vocal. As it is sitting in a higher frequency range, it will tend towards harshness, especially on a track like this. So let's go through and we will break down each move inside of each of these plugins to show you how we built out this vocal mix. Now the first move I make on the majority of the vocals I mix is a high pass filter. This one here we have set at about 180 Hertz. Like I said previously, it's sitting in a higher vocal range, so we don't have a lot of low end. We don't have a lot of stuff below about 200 Hertz. That's going to be very valuable to this vocal mix. That could be different in the verse. You can see we have a verse vocal and a chorus vocal, but they are both feeding this Vox channel, so we are mixing them together. That shows me that they are both sitting in the same frequency range, so we can treat them both the same. Let me show you what this high pass is doing. We'll click it in and click it out as we play through this vocal one more time. Let me do that one more time with the vocal soloed. I'm going to do a lot of this inside the mix because that's where realistically it matters. It doesn't matter what the vocal sounds like by itself in solo. It matters how it compares to the track and how it stands up against the rest of the mix. But this is kind of helpful to hear in solo just to demonstrate what we are cutting off from the low end there.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
You can hear that high pass cleans up a lot of that low end energy that we don't need in the vocal. So breaths, noises in between his vocal lines, that kind of stuff gets cleaned up with this high pass filter. Moving on up here, we're going to do our cuts and our reductive moves before we get on to the one boost we do have on this EQ. So moving on up, we're going to this yellow move here. We are doing a 2 dB cut, about a 2 dB cut at 360. So let me play you what this move sounds like inside the track. I'll play you the vocal without it, then we'll boost it up and you can hear the frequency range we're affecting, and we'll pull it back down to about this 2 dB cut.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. I can't take anymore.
So in isolation, without the rest of our plugins in, without our compressor, our multiband, or our reverb in, this move sounds like it's thinning the vocal out a little bit too much. And it may be at this stage. But you have to bear in mind that when we get our compressor in, when we add our reverb, that's going to add a little bit more of this low-mid energy. And if we don't make this move now, we'll be adding mud to our vocal rather than some low end, some low mid energy. Okay, so moving on up, we're going to go to this green band now. We're in kind of our high mid area around 1K. We're at 958 hertz. We are pulling out about 4.5 dB. We will do the same thing we did on our previous move. I'll play you the vocal inside the mix, and then I will boost up this move, and you can hear the range of frequencies we're affecting, and then we'll pull it back.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. Just give me the word. I can't take.
So there was a little bit too much energy in this 958 hertz area, and it was getting a little nosy sounding. So we're pulling a little bit of that back. This kind of 900 area, 1K area, up to 2K is kind of your telephony frequency range. So if you have too much energy in those frequency ranges, you're going to get your vocal sounding a little bit nosy, a little bit telephony. So we're pulling a little bit of that back just so it's not so nosy and it doesn't sound too thin or too isolated in that frequency range. Moving on up now, we're going to go to our one boost we do have on this vocal, which is this orange band. Up here, we're only doing a 0.5 dB boost at 3K, and you'll understand why when I boost up this frequency range. You'll hear how harsh, how edgy it gets very quickly. But we do want to add a little bit of energy in this area so our vocal can compete against all our guitars, our keyboards, and all the background vocals we do have going in this mix. We'll do the same way. I'll play the vocal, we'll boost up that area. Bear in mind it might get a little edgy sounding when we boost it up a little bit too much, and then we'll settle it back down to this very subtle 0.5 dB boost.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
It's a subtle move, and you heard when I boosted it up way too much, there was way too much of that frequency range going on, and it very quickly got harsh, it got edgy, and it was a little piercing to the ear. There's some frequencies poking out there that we don't want to exaggerate. But at the end there, I was A-Bing this 0.5 dB move, excuse me, and you can hear it's subtle, but it adds just enough energy to push our vocal out front of the mix so it's not fighting all these guitars or all these background vocals going on. The next element to our vocal mix, or the next step I would be taking after I get my EQ set, is I would be adding my compressor. This is usually a big effect on my vocal. It changes the frequency range a little bit, so I want to get this in as quick as possible, even out the vocal, so I'm hearing it not bouncing up and down in the mix, and the frequency range isn't all over the place. This is going to even out our vocal tonally as well as volume-wise, so it sits a little bit better inside the mix. I will do before, and then I will kick this compressor in, and you can see what it's doing to our vocal, and then we'll talk about the settings and how we're using it. We'll start without, though.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
So that is quite a bit, quite a bit of compression. I can't talk today. We're doing 7 to 10 dB reduction on this vocal, and you can hear the compressor. It's more of an effect on this vocal than it is just balancing our levels out. This is a dense mix. We've got a lot of guitars going, as you can see, and we've got a lot of background vocals going. So I'm really pushing this compressor to get some character, to get some energy from it, so this vocal can compete against all of the background vocals we have going on, all the guitars, that kind of stuff. It's a dense mix, so we want to make sure our vocal has the energy and the balance to compete. So we have to push this compressor a little bit more so our vocal stays out front and it stays on top of this mix. We've got our attack on this compressor set at about 0.5. We're at 0.55 milliseconds. That's pretty quick. This is a pretty quick attack on this compressor. This is FET 1176 style compressor. Now our release is all the way up. That's where I usually run the release. And this is usually about where I run the attack in this area here. We're at a 4:1 ratio. Now your input and output is going to depend on your vocal. This is a threshold dependent compressor, which means there's no threshold to change. It's fixed. So the more input we push, the more we push into the compressor, the more compression we're going to get. And then we adjust our output So our gain is the same pre and post compressor. Okay, we'll do one more time before and after the compressor, and you can hear the effect one more time before we move on to our multiband.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
Before we move on, notice it does bring up a little bit more of that low mid energy that we cut in the EQ. So this here, this yellow move, was more preparing for adding the compressor in. We want to get rid of that excessive low mid energy before our compressor exaggerates that area and adds a little bit of that beef back. Otherwise, we'll end up with too much. Moving on up here, we do have one more EQ before we get to our multiband. This EQ and our multiband are going to be taking care of the same area on the vocal, which is the high end on the vocal. Because this vocal's sitting in a higher register, most of our battle is going to be getting the high end to sit right. You want it to sound clean. You want it to be smooth, especially on a vocal like this. He's not doing any grit. He's not shooting for something that's more aggressive. We want it to be smoother, so we want to make sure that high end shines through and it's not too harsh or not too edgy up top. Otherwise, it's really going to turn off the listener. So this EQ, we're making two moves here. I'm going to A-B these together, and then I will boost them up, and you can hear the frequencies that we are pulling out. So we're at 7.2K here, and then I believe usually on a Neve style EQ like this is like 12K and up on the high frequency here. So we'll start with it out, and then I'll kick it in, and you can hear what it's doing to our vocal.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
So this EQ serves to sit our vocal in the mix a little bit better, and it serves to shape our high end. So if you notice, when I click this in, it actually sounds like we get more of that pretty high end because we're getting rid of the harshness in our vocal. Let me solo up the vocal, and we'll do this same A-B for you, and you can hear it one more time, a little bit more isolated.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word.
We're getting rid of that harshness so that pretty high end, that airiness, that crispiness that we like in his voice has a little bit more time to shine through, a little bit more space to shine through. We'll put it like that. Let me boost both of these up so you can hear the frequency ranges that we're affecting, and then we'll move on to our multi-band.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. Just give me the word. I can't take.
Alrighty, a couple more plugins to go here. We're moving on to our multi-band here, which is going to serve to take care of our S's, our T's, things like that, but it's also going to serve to smooth out the high end a little bit more in conjunction with our last EQ. So these two moves are just permanently reductive moves. They're just pulling out these frequencies. The multi-band is going to serve to pull back frequencies when they're too much. But when they're not, it's going to let that pretty high end shine through. So when he pushes a little bit too much and we get a little bit too much of that 4K and up area and it gets a little too harsh, the multi-band is going to protect against that, and it's going to pull those frequencies back or not let them poke through. But when it's not, it's going to let that high end shine through, and we're going to get that crispiness and that airiness that we like on his voice. So we'll start without, and then I'll kick it in, and we'll solo up the vocal. Or we'll solo up the vocal to start, and then we'll take it out, and we'll put it in the whole mix, and you can hear it against the final mix.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. Just give me the word. I can't take anymore.
You can really see it working, at least, on that last line when that S does come in. Let's put it inside the mix, and you can hear what this multi-band is doing to help our vocal inside the full mix.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. Just give me the
Let's pause here before we move on to the reverb, and we'll talk about what we did so far. So the first thing we're doing is we're getting rid of the frequencies that we don't need before we add volume, before we add evenness to our vocal, volume-wise and tone-wise. We're using our high pass to get rid of all that low-end energy that we don't need, room noise, air conditioner noise, breaths, things like that that poke through on the super lows there that we really don't need. Then we're hitting our low mid area. We're pulling out a little bit of that muddiness before we feed this into our compressor so we don't end up with too much energy in that area. And now this is a move specific to this vocal. You want to find any areas where your vocal's too nosy or too muddy or too harsh, and you want to get rid of those before you feed it into a compressor, before you feed it into a reverb. Otherwise, those elements are going to exaggerate these areas, and you will have to fight them down the road. So that's what this move is doing. We're getting rid of that nosiness, that telephony sound before we feed it into our compressor. And then we are doing one subtle boost here to give our vocal a little bit of competitive edge against the guitars, the background vocals in this mix. Then we're moving on. We're adding in our compressor. So this is helping to hold that one subtle boost or any boost you do make in place in the vocal frequency rise. It's bringing up a little bit of that low mid energy, so it's balancing things out, balancing out our EQ. It's also serving to balance out the vocal volume-wise. So if you have any valleys, any sections that are quieter, any sections that are louder, this will help to even those out volume-wise. And in this instance, this type of compressor is actually imparting some character, some vibe to our vocal to help it stand out and compete again against the rest of the elements in this track. Moving on, we got a little bit more EQ. We're pulling out a little bit more of the high end so this vocal isn't so harsh. So again, these are vocal specific moves. To this vocal, your vocal won't always be too harsh. It won't always have too much high end after you compress it. That's just something specific to this vocal as it is sitting in a higher range. So we're having to battle that high end a little bit more to get it to sit right. Then we're adding our multiband to take care of our S's, our T's, and to make sure our high end above 4K, that kind of harsh area, doesn't jump out too much and overshadow the rest of our vocal. Moving on down the line, we have one element left to add, and that is our reverb. So once we get our vocal balanced frequency-wise and volume-wise, we want to add depth so it sits with the track rather than kind of on top of the track or apart from the track. With a dense mix like this, a lot of background vocals, a lot of guitars, keyboards, you don't want a dry vocal. It won't sound right. It won't connect with the mix, with the other instruments, or with the band. You want to add a little bit of wetness, a little bit of reverb, whether you go for slap delay or quarter note delay, something to give it a little bit of wetness so it sounds like it belongs in the track. First, we'll A-B the reverb, and then I will break down the settings for you. Well, actually, let me break down the settings for you first so we don't have to scroll all the way back over. So we're using a plate reverb. This is a plate reverb that I stole from CLA, and the settings kind of changed here when Studio One updated, but it's still the same kind of sound. If you're shooting for something similar to this, it's about a 2-second plate reverb with a 152 millisecond pre-delay. Now, I know that sounds like a huge pre-delay. It sounds pretty long, but the reason for that is so our vocal isn't fighting with the reverb and they're not battling to inhabit the same space. If you have your vocal and your reverb going at the same time, you're going to have to cut a little bit more out of your vocal and your reverb so it doesn't get muddy sounding. They're going to be fighting to inhabit the same frequency range and that same space, and you're going to have to thin out one or the other or both to get it to sit right in your mix. With this longer pre-delay, what we get is we get our vocal shining through. It can be thick, it can be huge, it can be awesome. And then 152 milliseconds later, or just a little bit after, you hear your reverb and you get that tail that you want without them fighting, without it cloudying up your vocal. Okay, that's the reason for the pre-delay. That's our reverb settings. The other thing I have here, this is always on my reverb, just pulling off that low end area and a little bit of the high end area. We don't want too much airiness on the reverb, and I don't want a whole bunch of low end to blow up my reverb. And then I have this, I always have this move in the middle. I think I stole this from Dave Pensato a long time ago. It's probably not even doing anything at this point, but it's still there. It's still part of my template. So we're getting rid of low end, cutting off everything below 200, getting rid of excessive high end, so it's not too airy or too crispy up on top. Just wanted to add a little bit of tail, a little bit of mid-range energy. So that's our reverb, that's our EQ after our reverb. Let me A-B it for you. We'll start with out, and then I'll kick it in, and we'll soul it up. You can hear the vocal in isolation with the reverb.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your.
So it gives our vocal a little bit of space, a little bit of width there, but it gives it some depth, so it sounds like it belongs inside this mix. It doesn't sound like, a dry vocal trying to sit on top of this mix, or that's been, recorded over the top of like a stereo track or something, or a finished mix. Let's solo up the vocal here, and you can see, or hear rather, the reverb in isolation here.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in.
Sounds pretty dramatic by itself there, but we do have it pretty subtle here. It's down at -13, so it's down quite a bit. In isolation, it sounds pretty huge, but in the track, it's pretty subtle. You hear the tail. We'll listen one more time inside the track. You can hear the tail from the reverb, and it gives our vocal a little bit of space, but it's not overpowering our vocal. It's not overpowering our mix, and it's not muddying things up.
I can't take anymore. Baby, I'm all the way yours. I'm holding it in. I'm holding out for your word. Just give me the word.
And that's it. That's how we built out this vocal tone. Those are steps you can take to build out any vocal tone. These concepts will apply to 90% of your vocals, unless you're going for something super specific, unless you're headed for a specific sound. You can use these tactics, these strategies, to get your vocal to sit inside the mix. Use your EQ, get rid of the frequencies you don't need, boost anything you like, anything you want to put out in the vocal. If there's frequencies that you want to use to push it out front more, give it some more energy. Then use your compressor to balance it tone-wise as well as volume-wise, and get it sitting evenly on top of the mix. Push it out front, give it some vibe, some energy. Use your multiband or a de-esser plugin if you have it to make sure your S's and your T's aren't jumping out too much. And if you have a vocal that's a little bit harsh on top, you can also use your de-esser to control your high-end energy. And then, of course, you want to use reverb or delay to give it some effect, give it some depth, or a little bit of width as well, so it connects with your mix and it doesn't sit apart from it as a dry vocal trying to compete with a finished mix. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you enjoy this type of content, if you enjoyed this video, check out the description. I just released a new course breaking down 6 different vocals, start to finish, going through every move, EQ, compression, de-essing, reverb, delays, to show you how we build out 6 different vocals in 6 different styles. Check out the link in the description for the course, and I will see you soon in another video.